Hi, this is Zena Harris.
And I'm Mark Rabin.
Welcome to the tie-in.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the tie-in. Today we have a slightly different angle on sustainability where we're speaking with Lilian Liu, who comes from the fashion, tech, and music industries. And I ran into her at Sustainability New York Climate Week in the fall, and we started chatting, and we were at a film related, sort of entertainment sustainability event. And so right away we had something in common and we started chatting, and yeah, just got a great chat, and we kept in touch. And I was like, let's interview you in the podcast because we talk a lot about film and music. We've ventured into a few other sort of like publishing and books, right? Storytelling. But fashion is something that I think is really important. And it's also an important part of film and entertainment, but it's an entire thing on its own. So yeah, that's what sort of like thought, let's get her on here and speak to her and get her take on from a different angle.
Totally, totally. I'm curious to hear how she sees sustainability in these different industries that she kind of works within, and if there's anything that we can draw on from entertainment in what she's saying. Like I feel like I'm always learning, so I'm curious to hear how she talks about it, talks about sustainability, and if, maybe I'll pick up some tips for the
Exactly.
work in entertainment.
I mean, I
So,
think that's what it's all about, right? It's just keeping going and pulling ideas from all the different spots. Yeah, and I look forward to hearing about some of your ideas from Australia as well, right, on your recent trip. So
mhm.
that's another episode.
That's another episode. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, let's get into this conversation with
Yeah,
Lillian. I'm totally looking forward to it.
awesome. Today, we're speaking with Lilian Liu, and she's an award-winning sustainability strategist and director named GreenBiz 30 Under 30 2020 and Grist 50. Over the last decade and a half, she's worked with some of the world's most influential companies and organizations on ESG, social and environmental sustainability. She straddles the intersections of fashion, music, technology, and more. She's also a frequent speaker at places like Trellis, New York Times, Harvard University, and the UN. She serves as an advisor for impact-driven organizations, including Earth Percentage, Pledge 1%, North Zone, and Spark Labs Ventures. And Lilian, we met at New York Climate Week last year, or this past time,
Yeah.
and I had a great chat. And we actually met. We were in the film and entertainment sort of section of it, so that's what got us talking. And then we've been in touch since. And yeah, I just really love your take on it, your no bullshit, get things done,
Mhm.
and your focus on driving value as well. So yeah, thank you for joining us here.
It's great to be here. Yeah, it was great to meet you during Climate Week, and thank you so much for the warm introduction.
Yeah, it's lovely to meet you, Lillian.
Likewise.
Yeah.
So just to start, yeah, maybe just give us a little bit of background about yourself, what drives you, and what your areas of focus are, and then we can take it from there.
For sure. I mean, you already did such a great job on that,
Hmm.
but I'm happy to
What did I
give a bit
miss?
more context. Yeah, no, you didn't miss much. Yeah, mainly been spending my whole career working in the corporate sustainability space. And I like to say that I've really seen sustainability from many different angles. I've worked, with companies, sort of at the company in-house. I've been on the consulting side of things. I've been at the UN working with corporate sustainability, been with nonprofits. So it's been really interesting to see kind of tackle the same issues, but from so many different perspectives. And as you said, straddle many different industries, but been quite focused on the fashion side, the tech side, and also entertainment and the music. And we'll get into that more, but I think that there's definitely some similarities and skills that I draw upon to kind of drive change between the different ones. Um, yeah, I mean, right now and I told you that when we first met, but I've launched my own consultancy, so it's called
Hmm.
Blossom. And I'm super excited. It's a tech-forward sustainability consulting firm. And we're really quite focused on maximizing value, driving ROI for companies and organizations around sustainability, and really leveraging tech-forward solutions to streamline. Um, I'll stop there. I'm happy to dig in more to like kind of where I started, but yeah, if you have any questions, I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, well, I'm curious because I love your sort of I guess multidimensional background and kind of how you come to sustainability in that way. And I'm curious, like in your work with these various types of organizations, like what are is there a common thread? Is there, a trend that you're noticing? Is there like a common question? What do you see, is kind of the rub across the board?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Um, I think that it's interesting. So I've been doing this for quite a while, and I feel that what kind of help that companies need have shifted throughout my work with them. I'd say when I first got started in this field, early 2010s, um, the work was more focused around um, kind of companies wanting to know like what to do in terms of, we need a strategy. We need to figure out like where our impacts lie. Um, Help us create the roadmap. Help us create the vision around like what we're doing. So it was quite focused on really kind of getting the right pieces in place, and also a lot of education around we're not sure exactly what we need to be doing. And now I'm speaking quite broadly across industries. So
Mhm.
obviously there will be nuances, in music versus fashion, but um, generally speaking, that felt like where a lot of the energy was. I feel that the shift has gone more towards now, okay, we have a plan. And now we need help either executing that plan in terms of really operationalizing all the nice policies that we've put in place, implementing different programs so that they actually like drive change, and really seeing the results and starting to hit those goals that we've set for ourselves. So I feel that now, companies are very focused on like getting the results that we want to see. And I mentioned ROI, and the reason with Blossom, founding Blossom is to really help companies drive that ROI from this work. And so that's something that I see that companies need too. Um, just really, yes, a great plan. That sounds good, but like, why are we doing this again? And help me really prove how it's driving the business case. So yeah, like an interesting shift there from sort of strategy to now more tactical, and really needing to get quite hands-on in terms of executing and driving change.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so interesting to me because I've been working in entertainment for a little over 10 years, specifically. And I feel like maybe it's the nature of the work, but I feel like folks are still kind of swirling on the tactics, and
Mhm.
some have moved into strategy, but it's kind of been like, have you noticed like we always talk about sustainability planning
Mm,
and strategy, like, start there and like have that grand vision and like figure out, where you want to go. But I feel like people swirl in tactics. Do you find people tend to kind of
I
go that route
think,
as well?
yeah, I mean, and I think to your point, like it can obviously depend on the industry and the company. And I'm talking generally speaking in
Hmm.
sort of helping companies, as a consultant, and even more looking at the leaders. I
Mhm.
think that's the flow that I've seen in terms of progression. But of course, there are some companies that just like are super tactical. They
Yeah.
don't want to set goals. They don't necessarily want to communicate a plan. They just want to get it done.
Mhm.
And that's fine too, right? That's like one way of doing the work. What I have found useful is, if you only go for the tactics, it's easy to sort of, when the going gets hard, you stop, or
Yeah.
you know, you're not continuing to invest. And so the beauty with the goals and having something public is that, you continue to kind of have that pressure, and there's a reason for continuing this more long-term thinking versus, we're getting pretty tactical, and right now things are going well, but maybe next year it's a different political situation, and suddenly we're backing out of
Hmm.
goals. And obviously
Mhm.
companies are doing that right now anyway, but
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, it's interesting to hear your take on that. And maybe with the film industry, I can imagine that being a bit different as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well,
No,
how does that, I mean, and then that's part of it too, right? The fashion industry um, is, from what I understand, quite a bit further ahead in terms of sustainability
Yeah.
versus where we're at now with film and maybe even the music industry. I mean, Zena and I are still battling it out every day in the film industry, and I'm like pushing and pulling, and then there's silos, and everybody's insular and protectionist about their
Mm.
thing. But it doesn't like feels like fashion is so much further ahead in many ways. And have you noticed the difference between fashion and music as well? I'm just to
Hmm.
like for our listeners, right, to really understand that, because we talk a lot about music and how amazing it's moving ahead, right?
Yeah.
And it's making leaps and bounds in the last year or
Yeah.
two, like a huge leap, but still in its infancy, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that we're seeing some really incredible work coming out of the music space, which is super exciting. Um, I think the point to fashion being, a lot of fashion companies have been doing this for longer, to be frank, because they've
Mm,
been under pressure for longer. There's been a lot more risk. Obviously, it's there there's a large supply chain, right? There's a large supply chain tail for fashion companies, and for music it can be, but usually it's less. And so there's more risk, right? So
mm,
really, I think sustainability in fashion started really around the human rights and labor, and really driven by risk. And that just forced stakeholders and companies to like figure it out and get serious. Um, and I think what I see fashion being more advanced than music, just because, this work has gone on for longer, is, for example, there are quite a lot of, I would say, like both third-party standards, something like the DHC, the zero, I think it's CDHC, which is around chemicals. That's a roadmap for
mm,
that. There's like roadmaps for leather. There's initiatives around traceability. There's a lot of industry groups where, sustainability leaders in fashion can come together and really share. And, music has that too. But I feel where there's a bit of a gap in music right now is that really that like expert third party group that can say like, we're on the right path here,
mm.
right? There's a lot of tactics, which is great. There's a lot of knowledge sharing, but I think that there is a bit of an opportunity to have more standard setters, really, in the entertainment industry, and at least the music industry, which I'm more familiar with. So, and I think that comes with time. Um, and it's great to see that there's so much knowledge sharing happening in both these sectors. I think that's absolutely key to start there. Um, Yeah, I think that's the difference that I've seen, but the similarity, I mean, you know, they're also very similar in the sense that they are both culture carriers
Yeah.
in a way that tech not necessarily is. And, you know, there is uh, that similarity around you can really drive a narrative, you can really drive messaging, you can really inspire people with fashion, with music. And so I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned from fashion. in terms of that, even if the business models are quite different.
I think fashion has been at this longer. They've had a lot more scrutiny. People, this is a consumer product driven industry where you can choose the brand you want to purchase based on their values and, their supply chain or whatever is important to the consumer. It's different with music and with film and TV where it's purely purchased based on the entertainment value, not necessarily
Mm,
how it's made. And so there's I think the awareness factor from the public has been kind of less, um, I guess just, less overall, until more recently, as, we've
mm,
been talking about, more case studies publicly and, that sort of thing. So I think just generally public awareness and how one interacts with the industry itself is is just different. And that's sort of the driver there is different. So the industry responds differently,
mhm,
Right.
I
And for
think.
music, I think music is a kind of a cross section of that because it doesn't really happen behind the scenes. However, you have like 5 hours to do your thing, right? Or you have like
mhm,
3 days to, get everybody in there, take all the money out of their pockets, blast them with whatever, and then they're
mm,
gone. And then it's the same thing as like throwing a party or something like that, right? I mean, it's nobody
mm,
notices when they're there, they're oblivious and they leave, and then it's just a bunch of garbage everywhere and a bunch of stuff going on, right? And behind the scenes, the only time anybody ever notices something is when it goes down, right? Like,
mm,
so, I always say it's like people, if you're doing batteries and you're doing clean energy, people notice even less
mm,
because there's no noise or there's no emissions or there's not a big diesel generator going or this, right? Something like that. So it's it's an interesting one, but what we're seeing is we've had a lot of discussions here where, obviously it's the producers and the organizers being pushed and pulled a little bit by their fan goers, concert goers and so on.
mm.
But what we found is it's a lot of times it's the artists that are
Yeah.
now starting to push those demands, right? We're seeing Billie Eilish and Coldplay and John Mayer a long time ago with the LED lights, right, everywhere in every stadium. And so it's an interesting one, and I believe that you're going to have the artists are going to have to be the main driver for this,
Mhm.
and then the the fan base gets in line very quickly and gets inspired. So,
Yeah.
but if you're going to go to a festival and you're like, oh, there's only plastic water bottles and a bunch of waste styrofoam, what are you going to do? What are you going to do there? You're not going
Yeah.
to you're not going to boycott the event because you're already there. You already paid $300. You're already there. Whatever. So I don't know. It's an
Yeah.
interesting like right who's driving that change?
Yeah. And I would like to plug Earth Percent here for a hot minute because
Yeah.
Please.
I think with Earth Percent, which I'm on the advisory board of this NGO, and Earth Percent focuses on climate and music. And basically, we're asking, one of the activities is that we're asking artists to donate 1% of profit. It could be a tour, it could be sales out of record to Earth Percent, and then we make sure that that goes to climate causes, the right, climate NGOs. And obviously that's important, that 1%, but I actually don't think that that is the biggest driver here. Really, it's that we give artists a platform and we help them get involved. Because the most common question that I get from artists is, I want to do something, but I don't know how or what to do. I'm not sure what to say. Like, but I definitely want to get involved. And so Earth Percent is just, I think the beauty is that it's such an easy way for artists to get involved. Um, and then you can decide how big you want to go, how deep you want to go. But it's like, okay, I'm now part of this community of artists. We're committed to climate and driving climate action. We both have like financial stake in this. We're actually, you know, giving part of our profits to this organization, but also, you know, it's a natural way for people to start talking about climate versus kind of coming out of
Mhm.
nowhere or feeling like you're like, am I alone in this? Or I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. So yeah, I think more groups like that we're starting to see too.
Mhm.
Um, but I think you're absolutely right. The artists really have the superpower here in terms
Have to.
of driving change in
It's
music.
their duty in some
Yeah.
way. I mean, not to like you can't force an artist to do something they don't want to do, but there is a point there where it at some it's their duty, and it's also going to and they're going to drive the large organizations, right? The behind the Live
Hmm.
Nations of the world. Now, I recently saw a job ad for Live Nation. I think Zena, you shared it with me, right? It was like they're hiring a sustainability lead, and so all these big organizations have folks that are working at the very top levels as well.
Mm.
Um, so I think we're going to start to see music accelerate fairly quickly,
Mm.
and catch up with film. And we talk about this a lot. But yeah, it's kind of like an opportunity for music
It's
to really
exciting.
do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you said earlier about these industries being culture carriers. Maybe let's kind of unpack that one a little bit and kind of I'm curious how you've seen some of the impacts of like maybe a brand talking about or integrating sustainability and how that may have rippled out into, the industry or, the consumer or I'm curious
Mm.
what you've seen.
In fashion, it's really, brands really create trends. And sometimes the receivers or the consumers, I don't love the word consumer, but in this case we'll use it and I think you understand what I mean.
Yep.
It's the public or the person that wears the fashion that can create it too, of course. And there's a symbiosis there, right? Everyone inspires each other. Um, but yeah, I think, if a brand um makes a statement, it just like sends such a strong signal to whoever is kind of receiving that. And so Mm, and I think consumers they they know if it's authentic, and they also notice. I think it's a bit of a myth that consumers don't care.
Mhm.
Like, when you're looking at studies, and it's like, yep, consumers want sustainability, but they don't want to pay more for it. Like that's like the classic line that you'll hear, and that might be true for certain studies, but in the end, what I think impacts the decision that a consumer makes or a fashion wearer is also just the brand reputation and the brand identity that this brand has. um, and reputation does align with purchasing intention, and so if you have sustainability initiatives, yeah, it might not be one to one with a sale, but it will impact your reputation, which will impact drive that ROI and drive the business case. So, um, yeah, I mean, I think that there is a very strong link there. I think it's hard for me to say like this one specific brand example because it's not very often measured.
I mean, we talk about it a lot in film as culture creators as well, in terms of like the messaging in the movies. I mean,
Mm.
even like uh, how a lot of doom and gloom, for example, around the climate narrative versus creating the vision of a positive future for the climate narrative, or
Yeah.
taking those changes. I mean, I think there's so many
Mm.
opportunities for entertainment, and that's why, I mean, I look at fashion in some form of it's a hybrid of a lot of different things. But I mean, I think a lot of what we're doing and what we're talking about here are, I mean, here we're not talking about construction and heavy industry and construction site. Like changing culture in a construction site's a whole different ball game.
Yeah.
But we can, I think, through the sustainability lens, or for whatever, for lack of a better term, we can influence or change through this entertainment arena that we're playing in. And
Hmm.
fashion, I think, yeah, as we're discussing here, has been a leader for decades. I mean, look at the sort of the Patagonia pledge, right? And all the
Right.
things like they changed. Like Patagonia now has been shifted over to steward ownership, I believe. Right. So
Mm.
there's different ways to even take it to the next level in how you structure the entire organization.
Yeah.
We're nowhere near that when in film and entertainment, but
Mm.
we're already starting to see it in some of the largest companies in fashion. So I
Yeah.
think that's a really interesting, that's changing massive culture at a corporate level.
There's I mean, there's this iconic campaign that Patagonia did, right? That's called "Don't Buy This Jacket."
Yeah.
Are you guys familiar with that one?
Yep.
Yeah, so they
When
basically said, they put out like an ad saying like, here's a Patagonia jacket, but don't buy this because we don't want you to buy more things than you need. And that actually led to, you know, more goodwill, more sort of positive brand and more sales for Patagonia. But, you know, like I think that's like such a good example. I mean, REI also did a similar, not exactly the same, but um, they had a campaign around Black Friday, which was like, don't buy anything this Black Friday, instead go outside. So it was the opt outside campaign.
Mm,
And in a very similar way, like that really created a lot of goodwill for the brand. And I'm sure it didn't hurt sales. And so, maybe those are two kind of good
yeah.
examples where, again, fashion, trendsetters, they decide what's cool. And in the end, that's usually beneficial for the brand.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're hoping to see that um, a lot more. And again, like I bring it back to film, that's what we talk a lot about.
Mm,
But there's definitely rumblings from the boots on the ground, right? The ground up. And again, we're not talking about sort of sweatshops pouring effluent into rivers, okay? But just to
yeah,
be clear, but it's still people. It's
yeah.
still good, hardworking people at the grassroots level that are doing it day in, day out, who are feeling extracted or aren't feeling the love or aren't feeling that organization. And we're seeing it over and over again.
Mm,
And that plays into this narrative, right? But as Zena said, when you go to a movie, you're consuming the movie, right? You're not really like looking at, what the folks on the ground who made the movie are feeling like or whatever and
yeah.
so on. We are seeing product placement in some, like obviously an
Hmm.
EV or solar panels on a roof, but it's still
Hmm.
nascent, right? It's
Yeah.
still super nascent.
Just because I don't know too much about the film world, but in the same way that fashion uses transparency, right, and sort of shows the work behind the scenes, as you said, like in
Hmm.
the supply chain. If I don't work in film, but I'm, watching a lot of films, like it would be interesting for me to see how is a film made? Who is impacted by this? What are the implications along the film's supply chain? There's like all these big production things happening to make the worlds, and what goes into that? And I think like breaking that down would also help kind of put pressure on the film industry, but also like make film consumers more aware on where they need to be asking companies to do better. So there's a whole transparency thing that I haven't necessarily seen with the entertainment industry, but I'm curious if you know of like any examples there, or what you think of that.
Oh yeah. Boy. It is definitely like I love that you're asking this question because it's it's something that we do not see.
Hmm.
The case studies that I will say some studios do behind the scenes videos of, the sustainability, happenings behind the scenes. That's wonderful. I want to see more of that.
Mm.
What we what we have to keep in mind with things like that and the case studies that have been coming out more and more, which are wonderful, definitely want to see more of those as well, is that they're highly curated, right? We get to see the
Hmm.
best in those case studies. We get to see the best in those behind the scenes videos. We're not seeing the sort of full picture of what happens, right? So I think that's important to keep in mind. I also think that these kinds of activities, case studies, and behind the scenes videos do serve as a level of transparency for sure, and want to see more. But I think we've got a long way to go in entertainment and transparency, honestly. talking about, actual issues that people are facing. We don't do that publicly a lot,
Mm.
um, for fear of maybe reputational risk, maybe,
Getting
some
fired.
legalities, maybe some, what did you say, Mark?
Getting fired. I
Getting
mean, it
fired.
can
People
happen.
are
Don't want to get
afraid
fired.
to speak out about anything for fear of getting fired. And I don't think that's okay, honestly. And, because if how does change happen? You have conversations, you bring forth issues, you resolve the issues, you figure out what to do, you change course a little bit. Like this is all
Mm.
normal in the course of like, human existence, right? And if we don't do it because we're scared of losing our jobs and our livelihood, then nothing changes. So it's just
Hmm.
interesting. We got a long way to go in terms of transparency.
And the
But
enabling environment that you alluded to,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
If you don't have that, then who's going to come and say or change things?
Right.
Because obviously, putting food on the table is always going to be the first thing that you need to do.
Exactly. Yep. 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 I'm also curious. I feel like you might have a different take on the tech environment than maybe I've
Mhm.
Mm.
been hearing from Mark. So I'm curious what your work is like in tech world.
I think in terms of sustainability and ESG, a lot of the skills are the same. Obviously, there's differences in terms of industry knowledge and groups and stakeholders and who you're partnering with, but you still know that, okay, I need to partner. I need to find the right industry organizations. I need to find the right frameworks. So, in terms of the infrastructure for getting this work done, you can use a similar playbook, right?
Hmm.
Um, but on the other hand, the I think the cultures are quite different in tech versus fashion or music. I think that tech is driven by not always, but slightly different things in terms of doing this work. And then obviously, you have like more like hardware tech, which has like more of a supply chain, and you might see more similar work happening around traceability, transparency, human rights. And then you have the SaaS software companies that, of course, you have to work with suppliers, but not necessarily such high risk suppliers. Yeah, it's been really interesting. I think the tech world also, when I started working more with tech companies, felt like they had started a bit later than fashion players. I think just because there hasn't been as much of a limelight on them in terms of risk. I mean, now everyone's talking about data centers guzzling water and energy, and how AI is driving energy demand. And now it's much more in the public eye. Obviously, we've known this for a long time. It just wasn't in the public eye. So
Hmm.
again, power of messaging and the stories that we're
Mhm.
telling. Um, but now I think tech is kind of like having a moment where it's like, oh, okay, we do have to fix things. Um, I haven't read the article, but I saw that Financial Times had published a report that linked data centers in the US to public health and
Oh,
basically like worsening public health crisis
Mm,
and air pollution. So yeah, can send that over after this. Maybe we should
please.
link that in the show notes.
Yep.
Um, but those studies are starting to come out. So I think, and also what I've noticed in tech is that people tend to move quite quickly.
mm,
And there's a lot of kind of appetite and maybe less, I don't know, fear. It's maybe not the right word, but there's just this sense of always innovating. And so
mhm,
sustainability benefits from that culture.
Yeah.
And Yeah, it's been really fun to kind of see how quickly I feel the tech sector has been able to pick up on sustainability, even if we're not there yet. There's a lot that has happened the last couple of years.
mhm,
And there's probably a lot of lessons to be learned from that speed that tech can move to how we can apply some of that to the slower moving industries like fashion and even film and entertainment. And so where are you seeing the real change happening? And when we spoke, you sort of talked about the messy middle. a little
Mm,
bit. Um,
yeah.
yeah, I don't know. So can you let us like shed a little light onto what you mean by messy middle and that change?
Yeah. I mean, I can talk to some of my experiences with Braze, right? So I was the inaugural sustainability lead there and worked there for a couple of years to really build sustainability from the ground up.
And
And
what's Brace, by the way? Just
Braze is a customer engagement platform. It's a SaaS company,
got it.
public company headquartered in New York, about like I want to say 1,600 employees, so mid cap,
Wow. Okay.
um, and lots of offices around the world. A pretty international company, and again, I was hired to sort of start from scratch, which I thought was a great and exciting opportunity. And that meant, of course, doing a lot of educating. I mean, when you're the first in, it's like, this thing doesn't exist, so how do I bring people along? Um, and something that I like to say, is that when you are a sustainability professional at a company, when you hire someone on your team, you usually hire someone to kind of take work off your plate, right? It's like, I'm getting someone to help with this or someone who can manage this thing that I need. But a sustainability professional doesn't necessarily take work off your plate because you come and you want to change things and you want to do things differently. So you might not necessarily add things to your plate, but you're definitely not like the feeling I get sometimes, and this is where we always need to sort of show the business case and why we're doing this, is that you're kind of coming and you want to change things, right? So you're not making it necessarily easier for anyone, at least not in the beginning. You might get there, but that's kind of, you know, might not be the case in every situation. But if you're coming in and you need to convince your organization that, hey, we need to do things differently, that's just the reality of things. So you got to be ready for that. So basically, there's a lot of stakeholder sort of buy-in that you need to get. And if you're lucky, you might have a CEO or C-suite that supports this and is like really clear on why we're doing it. And with Braze, Braze's CEO is very supportive of climate initiatives and sustainability. And obviously they hired me. So like there was a clear buy-in. But I think where it can often get tricky is, as you said, like the messy middle, right? Like getting everyone else that actually have to deliver on this work on board. And so um, that meant for me working with the engineering team, working with the procurement team, working with the workplace folks, the people team. There's so many people that are involved in, you know, a decarbonization plan. Like, how do we reduce emissions? And so we set a science-based target for Braze. And that's obviously not going to be on one person to do. You're going to need pretty much everybody in the company. If you happen to be in the procurement team, it's like you really need those teams to help you drive supplier engagement. Because for Braze, Scope 3 is the biggest emissions driver. And so it means we have to get our suppliers on board. Um, but also, everyone travels, and business travel is going to be a big impact. And so, even if you're not directly sort of touching any of these policies or programs, eventually, you will be part of the success of this goal. And, you know, the sales team was also really interesting. I worked quite a lot with them to kind of get this science-based targets and all the climate plans done. And it was actually really helpful. At first, I thought it was going to be difficult, right? Like sales above all, and we got to keep the customers happy and kind of like keep driving growth. Um, but it turned out that, the more I looked into this, the more I understood that many of our big customers want us to set sustainability goals. They're asking about it in RFPs. They're asking ESG questions. I even joined some, pitches with potential customers that they knew sort of cared about this. Um, and so I could link it quite clearly to like driving deal flow, whether it was like RFPs or whether it was for example, like I looked at, okay, who are our top 100 customers? And we're B2B, right? So we'd work with companies like Burger King or HBO or Venmo and all these like quite large companies. And I'd look at, our top 100 companies and I'd say, okay, this equates like X million car, right, in revenue. And I see that more than half of them have a climate target. And quite a few of those are science-based targets. So that was a great stat for me to bring to my leadership and to other folks in the organization and the sales team. Say, okay, look, these are really important customers, and they're going to expect to work with us to achieve their own climate goals. We're part of their supply chain. We're B2B. So in the same way that we're working with our suppliers, they're working with us. So looking at data points like that really helped to get buy-in to kind of educate people where they were, right? I'm not saying
Mhm.
let's start with the climate science. I'm saying let's start with looking at the deal amount here and the potential risk if we don't do this in terms of dollars. And then, backtrack from there and sort of unpack, okay, this is what that means. Um, and, really tackling each team the way that kind of they need it to be understood.
So it's kind of like there's
That
a
was a lot.
reverse. Yeah, it was great. There's almost like not a reverse ROI, but again, you talk about driving value, but it's also driving. It's like the risk of not doing it has a cost as
Hmm.
well to it, and that's something that we often overlook. In terms of our calculation, right? It's like, well, wow, is this going to make me more money today? What is can I get more for that? But it's also the cost of not doing it factors
And
into that.
and just to add to that, it's both the cost of not doing it, which is high, and then there's also at least in, what I understood from sort of all the stakeholder engagement that I did is if we don't do this, we might not get the next deal, or we might not get a bigger deal. Or when we're working with a company that has many global offices, maybe we're working with the North America one right now, but if we want the Europe one too, we're going to need this thing.
Yeah,
So it was also thinking about expansion and kind of future growth as well.
I
especially
love
as
that.
we, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Zena.
No, that opportunity lens, right? Like
Yeah.
if we're working in this market and that's great, but if we want
Mm,
more. And I love that you kind of pulled back the curtain on that because it is something um that, I've noticed as well. Like sometimes folks, don't realize where they sit in the supply chain and what might be needed of them or like, as you said, to get the deal, like excited that this company also does, to kind of give that slightly competitive edge.
Your point about um, new markets or into other markets like Europe and like and again other that are more advanced than where we are here in North America, because especially with this sort of shifting global trade, let's call it, even from my Canadian lens, right?
Yeah.
We are actively trying to look at, oh shit, we gotta go to Europe more like all in, right? And we gotta
mm.
export our natural resources. And Europe already wants sustainable supply chain stuff. And so we've got to get in line with that if we want to start accelerating business with Europe. And Asia's a whole different story. And it's just like um, so yeah, so I think it's just um, it's a really interesting dynamic market and world right now, and there's never a dull moment. Um, and we know people are interested and want it, right? So it's like I still feel like we're at the very early steps of this entire transformation,
Mm.
but we're making those steps. And I have just a kind of a question around with your tech understanding and like how do you see that lending itself to sustainability or film
Yeah.
entertainment, any sort of like top level takeaways in terms of like where you can sort of start to envision that intersectionality.
Yeah. It's a great question. There's just so much happening in tech, as you guys know, or has happened in the last couple of years too. And I think above all, I've seen a plethora of just ESG platforms, tech platforms, tools. GHG emissions measurement was kind of like the first that
Yeah.
became really big, and then it was more ESG dashboards and reporting, and that's largely driven by CSRD in Europe. But I think we'll see things, and now also like I'm seeing like climate risk assessments, really quantifying that, biodiversity. A lot of this has been on the environmental side, granted. Um, but there's just so many more tools now that can make your life as a sustainability professional more efficient. You don't necessarily need to be an expert in every single topic. You don't need to know how to make the actual calculations. Obviously, it's good to have an idea, but you don't have to sit in the spreadsheet and kind of verify everything. You can use the tools to help you quickly build a
Yeah.
reduction strategy. But you're obviously still going to need to do the work internally and get your stakeholders on board and make sure it's the right strategy. But it just frees up, I think, a lot of time. And it's also easier to, I think, teach people in your organization with these tools because you have the visual dashboards, you have kind of everything transparent. It's not sitting in a spreadsheet, it's not sitting in your PowerPoint. And so I know in tech, and especially with Braze, for example, it's like an extremely data-driven company, and people respond well to kind of visualizing that data and being able to kind of quickly change things up and get different graphs. And so it was just really useful to have a tool to be able to do all that quickly,
Yeah.
um, to drive the stakeholder process. And now with AI, I mean, I
Yeah.
use it in my work every day, but it's just it's like a little assistant, right? And I'm sure that's the case for
Yeah.
every industry. Um, and granted, in the beginning, I tried to do some benchmarking with ChatGPT and it failed miserably. I checked all the answers and then half of them were wrong, and I was like, what the F is this? I don't
Yeah.
trust this thing at all. But I think that,
Yeah.
now it's like, what, 2 years later, and the model has gotten a lot better. But yeah, I don't trust it fully for that type of work, but it's good for sort of ping-ponging ideas and
Absolutely.
at a higher level. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, definitely certain applications that works really
Mm.
well. For sure, for sure. Um, well, we ask all our guests this question and really curious to hear your thoughts. If you were to create a new playbook and guiding principles about sustainability, you work in multiple industries, so you can kind of shake that multi-industry lens. What would
Mm.
be first on your list?
I think that something that applies to all industries that I've worked in is the power of collaboration, really.
Mhm.
I think it's being able to share knowledge transparently with other folks in your industry. It just really moves the needle
Hmm.
so much faster because otherwise I've seen people do this, but reinventing the wheel, trying to get it on their own, when they can sort of reach out to a peer or an expert in the industry and just be on their way quickly. And so, and obviously you need a certain openness to do that, right? You need an openness to be able to share your learnings. I don't think every industry is the same there, but at least with fashion, with tech, I feel that there is a lot of openness to sharing, at least when it comes to impact professionals. Like I can't speak necessarily for other professions in those spaces, but yeah, just partnering up and like knowledge sharing. And I'm talking like even like sharing your policy templates with each other and really like, hey, this is how we're getting emissions factors for our supply chain data, like
Hmm.
getting more tactical,
Hmm.
because that's where the rubber hits the road a lot of times and you actually need to like get the answers quickly.
Yeah, yeah. It really, starts to speed things up, and that's kind of where
Yeah,
we're at right now, is moving quickly.
we need speed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Amazing. Well,
Yeah. Thanks,
I
Lillian.
thank you so much for your insight here.
This was so great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, yeah. And everyone check out Blossom. Definitely want
Hmm.
to make sure folks know about you and your work. And we'll be following you and keep in touch for sure. Like this is all really great stuff. Talking about sharing ideas and whatnot. This is
Hmm.
like,
Absolutely.
really inspiring and helpful to hear your perspective.
And likewise, definitely stay in touch.
Yeah. Thanks, Lillian.
Thank you.
What a cool conversation with Lillian.
Yeah.
Totally
She's
loved
so
it.
smart.
I
Yeah.
know, I know. She's so smart and she has such a wonderful perspective. For me, like spanning multiple industries, like that's just super cool, right? To hear
Hmm.
about sustainability from different perspectives, or different industry lenses. Fashion seems to be one of those that's further ahead. It's interesting to
Hmm.
hear about
Much further
what
ahead.
people think about,
Mm.
it related to that. Um, and how tech moves so much faster, as
I
a
know.
kind of observer of, tech world, I I sense that, but as someone working in sustainability and you've got a different kind of foot in tech as well. Um, yeah, it seems like it. It seems like it's moving fast. So
Hmm.
that's something to learn and draw on as well. Um, I also loved her talk about kind of the messy middle and how, engagement internally is really key
Yeah.
and engagement with multiple departments
Yeah. We've
and kind
got to
of
get buy-in from
got to
those
get the,
folks. If you can't do it, then you're not going to drive that change. Even if the executive beats it down, it has to be the folks making that change happen and implementing those changes.
yeah, in all departments, right? It's,
Hmm.
which is, I feel like, I say that a lot, but it's so refreshing to hear someone else say like, this is how we did it in our company and how we got the buy-in and why that mattered. So really liked hearing that as well. And her kind
Yeah,
of
her take.
entrepreneurial spirit and going out on our own and saying, we can do this, we can use tech, we can use AI, we can, really show that value, we can show the ROI. I think she's pushing that
Yeah.
forward. So,
Like a fearless view on sustainability and technology, which is really refreshing,
hmm
um, right,
hmm
compared to the world that we kind of circle around a lot of the time. And also, I think the big takeaway too is that bringing culture along and creating culture, and what does that mean, and to the impact of accelerating that
hmm
sustainability. I think that's the only really thing that's going to drive this change. You're changing culture both from the consumer level, let's call it, but also it's ground up, top down, everywhere in the middle. You change livelihoods, you change supply chains, you change everything about even the stories that are being told, the messaging is critical.
hmm hmm Yeah, and we have some key industries that do that. She touches a few of them, and we're seeing that in entertainment. I mean, I think it's so key. This culture piece, so key.
Mm,
And I'm not talking about just the culture of the general public that we have a chance to influence. I'm talking about the culture of the industry itself, right? Because I think that in order to really change, we do have to take a look inward
mm,
and think about the culture we've been swirling in for a long time. Is it okay? Do we want to keep, doing the same thing? Or how do we want to change and influence? And I think there are going to be certain movers. There already have been, as we've seen, um, kind of pushing, but we're
mm.
like, I don't know, like I'd love to get into more of those strategy conversations overarchingly. I'd love to like it was interesting to hear her say like we started with strategy and roadmaps and whatnot. And now we're like figuring out how to implement. I feel like we started, opposite and I mentioned
Yeah,
that, but like I feel like we really need to rethink that the strategy here
yeah,
overarchingly in entertainment. Like we really do need to
yeah,
rethink this. Um so
yeah. I
anyway,
don't even know if there is a strategy.
I don't know either, it's like, oh my gosh, I've tried myself to like push a few things and it's just, sometimes I wonder, like, are we seeing the big picture here? Are we as an industry really seeing the big picture? I'm not quite sure that we are.
I
So,
mean, I think it's going to take seismic shocks to advance it, right? I mean, things don't just happen. I mean, they should be incrementally and getting better and better, but I don't know if that's the case for this industry. I think it's going to be these sort of seismic shocks. And I think number one, all production's leaving LA and going somewhere else. Number two, the wildfires. Number three, like, I still have not heard, even like, great, like all of these things should have been like the film industry should be like, okay, cool, we're gonna make LA the greenest. Like this is it. We are gonna make every single production is going to be at this gold green standard, whatever it is, standard of like the most efficient, like production standards and low emissions and no waste and blah blah blah. I mean, still haven't
instead,
heard
we're
that.
kind of picking at the edges, like let's do as little as possible to like get a green seal, like it's really like you could go all in and cool and innovative and greenest ever and, make it
Hmm.
your hallmark city kind of thing, or you can chip away at the edges and, like it,
Yeah, we'll see. Time
we'll
will
see what
tell.
happens.
Time will tell.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Don't get me on a soapbox about that. Anyway, um, it's so we'll see what happens. I'll just stop and
Yeah. We'll
tie in,
stop it there.
folks. Love to hear your comments and what you're seeing in sustainability, what industry you're working in. Do drop us a line. Go to the tie-in podcast website, and there's a place to email us. Or I would also suggest DM us on Instagram or message us on LinkedIn. We check that. So
Facebook.
yeah, all the socials. So get in touch. I mean, this is where we
Yeah.
really get the opportunity to hear, what you're thinking and, shoot, maybe you'll be a guest on the show. So
Yeah.
get in touch. Our designer is Aaliyah Kane. Music is by Peter Chapman. Our producer is Colin Miller.